What is data binding in Angular? Well, data binding means the transfer of data, the communication of data between a view and a controller in any component in Angular. Whenever a data flows from review with this HTML file in our Angular framework and the TS file, this is called data binding. And there are two types of data bindings, one-way data binding and two-way data binding. Two-way data binding, of course, means when the data is going from the view to the controller and also for the controller to the view, in both directions, from the TS file to the HTML file and from HTML to TS. So this is, if this is happening both ways, it is called two-way data binding. But if it's happening only one way, let's say from HTML to TS or from the TS file or the controller to the HTML. So if in any one direction, the flow of data is in any one direction, it's called one-way data binding. And there are three types of one-way data bindings. One is this event binding, the next is the interpolation, and the third is property binding. So these three, this one, and this one, property, interpolation, and event binding, they are the examples of one-way data binding. And then two-way data binding I already explained. So what is the difference between these three: property, interpolation, and event binding? Event binding is of course easy. For example, you have a button on your HTML file, and let's say this button has some, if some change name event takes place, then this function do something will be called, which is defined in our component. Let's say do something, so this function will be called, and that's how. So the event is going from the view to the component. So this is called event binding. And then we have this property binding thing. I searched for an example on Google, this Telerik.com website. You see here you have a property of a button, let's say in your HTML file, which is disabled property. It should be true or false, and we are passing this property from the TS file, from the component. We are setting it to disable or enable here, and it just goes here in the property, and the button will be shown, or button will be shown as enabled or not enabled, depending on if the button disabled is true or false. So this is property binding and event binding, both explained. Now interpolation. Interpolation is simply, you have some property of your component, let's say any property with some name, it can be, let's say, some information that you want to show in your HTML. Let's say it's a number, it's the number of cycles, name of an employee, name of some visitor, or things like this, or number of days or anything, and then you want to show that on HTML and you pass from the TS file. Then you can call this using these two curly open braces and curly close braces. You simply put this name, property name, inside it with the same name as you declared in your TS file, and then this will be shown. These braces will convert it to a string and then show on your HTML or on your view. So this is called interpolation, and this is also one way. This is from the controller to the view. So property binding and interpolation is direction is from controller to the view, and the event binding is the direction is from view to the controller, and then this two-way binding is a binding which is both ways. Okay, as an example for two-way data binding, we can use, for example, ng model. Let's say we have some input component on our HTML, and we write something into it, and then we pass it back to our TS file using ng model, and then our TS file then sends it back and let's say prints it in another HTML component. So in this way you are inputting data from the HTML, the data is going back to the TS file, and then it's coming back to the HTML file and being displayed in some other component or other what should I say, and displayed in some other component of our view, you know, so of the HTML layout. So the data is going from the HTML layout to the TS and then coming back to the HTML layout. So this is called some kind of a two-way. This is, as an example, a two-way data binding. I can explain you here with a picture. Let's say this is our HTML file, this outer black rectangle, and then we have here an input. Let's say we put here a name, and then we have a text file, let's say a text here to display this name here, you know, at the same time. So we are going to kind of you know, pass this data to our controller, this will be the controller. So data is going to come from the view to the controller, and then this is, you know, for example, you can use ng model for this, you know, ng model is a good example, and then this data is going back from the controller to the view and is being displayed here. So in this text field, you know, and let's say this was an input field, you know, input, where you can simply input something, and then maybe you can click a button here, and then this button sends it back to this thing that you input to the controller, and then the controller sends it to displays it in the text field on the view. So this is how two-way data binding works. So I hope you understand now what I meant using ng model to do a two-way data binding.